How many times in your life has something had to fall apart in a spectacular fashion for you to let it go and to move on? I think I've only recently stopped doing this. Maybe I haven't stopped doing it. Maybe I will continue to do it in other areas, but I've definitely made it a habit to initiate radical change as soon as I feel the call within me. I don't wait for crazy consequences of me ignoring my spirit to manifest. And that's exciting. For those who are new, this is my video journal. It's not intended to be advice or guidance. I'm just expressing what I'm thinking and feeling in the present moment. I have no idea where I'm going with this. Like, some of the biggest things that have happened in my life, which are almost like divine intervention level, was like when I was 18 and I moved back to my hometown, and it was just so toxic, and all we did was drink and do drugs and party, and I didn't have any relationships that weren't focused on those things. I didn't have any kind of friendship or connection that was meaningful or fulfilling in any way. It was just get fucked up and waste all your money. And I knew that I had to leave, but I just kept going around in circles with it. Like, I had intentions to leave, I had ideas of what I was going to do with my life, but I didn't execute on it. So eventually the town flooded. It literally, like divine intervention, like all my stuff just got wiped out and I wasn't home. So it's like I kind of just moved on with my life because there was no other option. Like, there was the option. I could have participated in the cleanup and just gone on with the same stuff as always, but it was just such a huge disruption that I couldn't not take it as a sign. Like, I had to move on with my life. And it doesn't always have to be that hectic, but there's been, especially in relationships, I see this pattern in the past. Like, I'll stay in a relationship well past its expiration date, and I think that's not an uncommon thing. I think a lot of people will be able to relate to that. And you just keep putting out fires and fixing things with band-aid solutions, even though you know that you're not happy and the other person's not happy, and you're just on this downward spiral trajectory that leads nowhere but suffering. And we wait until so I've been guilty of like waiting for an excuse or a reason or a way to blame the other person for it being terrible. And the worst case that turns into is when the other person's actually awesome and just a great person in general with great values and integrity, and they're never going to transgress against you no matter how much the situation deteriorates. So you're just staying with each other in this stalemate. Like, never, one person doesn't want to break up with the other person because we have this value that we want to work on this thing together, even though we both know that it's crumbling day by day. And there's all these issues that seem unresolvable because all these different dimensions of our lives that we share have also reached a stalemate where there's no compromise that can be found, and you just end up in this situation with this other person that's actually awesome, where it's not going to go anywhere, and you have to wait for one of you to break. And I've been the person that's broken in the past, and then it's like this silly thing that we do where one person has to be the bad guy, and if we're both great people and just living our best lives and trying to contribute positively to each other and everybody else around us, and it's like, well, how do we break up if somebody isn't the bad guy? Somebody's got to have some kind of transgression that we can, so that there's a plausible story to tell people. We can't just go our separate ways because that's what's naturally occurring. That's just absurd, but that's absolutely what you can do. And so that's like my old attitude versus my new attitude now. And even I can see the growth because that story that I just said's real. Like, in a relationship, I waited until it completely imploded in fire and flames. But in my most recent sort of semi-serious relationship, I walked away as soon as there were indicators that it was going downhill. And when a couple of compromises stacked up, in fact, like not even compromises, it's when you fail to reach a compromise and you both just disagree and hate the outcome, and it's lose-lose, nothing positive happens. Once a few of those stack up in a relationship, I think that's like, okay, we need to separate, reassess, think about what we want as individuals again, because we obviously don't share the same goals and values together that we thought we may when we began this thing. So not just relationships, it's everything. What I'm talking about in this video is you don't need to wait for the fucking apocalypse or Armageddon to make a radical change. You can choose it straight away, and you can avoid a lot of unnecessary suffering if you can identify that you're on a path that isn't going to lead you to your destination, whatever that destination may be. And your destination is just whatever you intend. Like, you have an intention, what you want to create. You want to create this beautiful relationship with this other person. Maybe your intention is like, I want to have 3 kids and get married. Maybe your intention is, I want to hustle with this person and be like super successful, wealthy, famous, whatever, like, and you think like the other person is sharing that intention. But if intentions change as people grow and evolve as well. So maybe at the start it's like, fuck yeah, I want to just hustle and grow like financially and like create heaps of security before I even consider having kids. Or maybe somebody else, like, you first meet them and they're like, oh yeah, I want to get married and have babies, and then like you get into it a little bit and they get more interested in creating that security and financial abundance, and then they don't want to have kids. You know, things change. So the thing is, I guess, like identifying the change and not resisting it and actually flowing with it, you know. Like, the picture that came into my mind is like paddling out into the ocean on a surfboard, and you're in that zone where all of the waves are breaking, and you're like, you kind of just stay in that zone and you just keep getting smashed by white water, thinking like eventually a good wave's gonna come, when that's just not the place for you to be. You need to go somewhere different. You need to go somewhere beyond, deeper, further into the ocean, farther away from safety of the shore, into the dark depths. That's where you're actually going to get the nice, clean, new waves that you want, that are going to carry you the distance that you want to go. But we stay in this like shitty place thinking like, oh, it's familiar enough and it's close enough to the security of the shore. It's like not the thing that you need to be doing. Like, sometimes the best thing for you is to let go of the security, let go of the familiarity, and just leap. It almost always is, man. Especially if you are feeling stagnant and stuck in any particular area. In jobs and stuff, I've done it with jobs. I've stayed in jobs until I've literally, like, there's nothing to live for anymore. Like, you get to that stage of like the full-on nihilistic, like meaningless life where you're just like, there is no point to anything. Like, I'm working so much at this job and it's not providing me with enough financial abundance for me to even justify going. Like, I don't have anything to show for it. I just hate my life. And you stay with it and you stay with it and you stay with it until you have a fucking mental breakdown and lose your shit and go crazy. When, like, you knew that you hated it like a year ago, 2 years ago, a decade ago perhaps, and you could have just made the move like, okay, this isn't working for me, I'm not enjoying it, on to the next thing. And it's so common sense. Like, it sounds like common sense to say it right now, but I guarantee like people can relate that they're just staying in these situations waiting for it to get bad enough to act. That's the real thing that I've stopped doing, like waiting for something to get terrible enough to take some action about it, instead of just, as soon as something doesn't feel right, like, take action straight away. Like, you don't have to wait and see. You don't have to ride every possibility to the absolute end of the line to see the outcome before you decide whether it was a good or a bad decision. You can listen to your gut, you can listen to your intuition. It's telling you all the time, like, this leads nowhere, get off the tracks, find another way, like, just do something different. Sometimes it's like screaming at you towards the end of these things. If you are a person who holds on to something that's not good for you, that's what a mental breakdown is. It's your intuition screaming at you, please fucking stop, like, just go home, like, don't come to work anymore, like, do something different. And it manifests in these crazy ways. Like, you might go on a drug abuse bender, or like go and like just wreck a bunch of shit, like crash your car. Even like disease, like you might get really sick, and it's just all the stress and the resistance inside of you that's lowered your immunity and like allowed you to get into this state where you get so sick that you end up in hospital. Like, physical manifestations like that happen. Divine manifestations like I described, where like it almost seems like the universe like flooded the town to get me to wake up to myself. Like, dude, this is going nowhere, you need to act, you cannot wait for this to get any worse, it's time to move. But like, not everybody has the privilege of the privilege of having their home destroyed. That's seriously how I've framed that, how I've reframed that. I don't know if that's healthy or just so absurdly ridiculous and insane, but it works for me, you know. This is like, there's a whole like profession around like narrative therapy, where you basically just retell your life story over and over again until it becomes empowering instead of disempowering, and you just slowly write yourself out of that victim role and write yourself into a hero's role. And I've like paraphrased the shit out of it. I know nothing about it, I have no experience in it, but I know it exists, and I have people that love it, and I kind of probably do it, like, is what I'm saying, like some version of that through these journals and through different ways that I tell my story and share my story. And it's constantly a retelling as much as it is a living in the moment. Like, I'm always looking backwards as well as looking forwards, and being in the present moment. And because the past lives in your present, right? Like, all of these experiences that I've had, they're still in my awareness right now, so it's still a part of my direct experience. It's part of my internal creative reality in the present moment. And sure, I can like drop a memory and I can pick one up and I can explore and I can rearrange things, and that's all happening in the present. So it's just as important, because especially if you have no control over that stuff, like traumatic stuff, that, you know, you smell a particular smell, you see a familiar face that isn't truly familiar, it's a stranger, but it's familiar enough that it triggers off a memory of a trauma that you had with a person that looked like that. Like, trauma is like, it brings the past into the present moment involuntarily, and that's another aspect of this holding on to familiar things. It's interesting how trauma can inform your decisions in a really negative way, but because it's familiar and we're wired to seek the familiar, we choose it. We choose the familiar thing that's associated with the trigger of our trauma. Have you ever noticed that? Like, if you unhealed trauma like really influences the way that we navigate our lives. And that's why when people have negative traumatic experiences, they tend to have them again and again. Like, through the kinds of things that I've been shown, like if something really bad has happened in your life, it tends to happen repeatedly until you deal with the cause of the effect of the trauma. But yeah, my main point here is like, don't wait for things to get so terrible before you act. But it's not something that can be taught through like a lecture. It's something that it's experiential. You probably need to see in yourself how you keep waiting for everything to get terrible before you take action, and see how that's affecting you so much. But it's like hard to even imagine or consider, like, as soon as something doesn't serve you, just moving on, because that, again, trauma informs your decision-making process. And if you're somebody who's used to everything being really fucked up all the time and nothing going right and constantly suffering and people treating you badly, and you know, you've just got this reality where like all of that is normal, the idea of you just saying no and walking away from a shitty situation and choosing something better It's almost like I don't deserve this. Like I cannot. It's not something that I can even be capable of. But you are. It's just that it's a radical change for you, or it has been for me in the past. Whereas like other people who they don't have any trauma informing their response, they're just, it's natural. Like, of course, like this feels shitty to me. It's been 5 seconds and I've decided I don't want this. I'm gonna go do something better. And it's just wild, like how much the freedom can differ, the freedom factor. Like I'm way more free now, so I can see it more clearly. Like I can make choices without that trauma informing my responses. But I can also look back and see how like I couldn't even see the options that were on the table when like my vision was so clouded with trauma. Like it was just like I couldn't even see through those internal creative realities. It's just like my life is supposed to be shit. And people in those kinds of situations, that's the language that they actually use. Those are the phrases that come out of their mouth. Like they will say like life is suffering, like everything bad always happens. What's the most recent one that I've been hearing repeated a lot? Like if things are going too well, something bad's going to happen soon. You've heard like countless versions of this, like just that trauma-informed response to reality. Like nothing is supposed to be good. I'm supposed to suffer. And it like, people are aware that it's coming out of their mouth, but they don't think that it's as absurd as it sounds to somebody who is free from the trauma. They're just like, oh, like I thought everybody felt this way. Because that's what happens with your internal created reality, right? Like you just like think, oh, this is just how it is. It's objective. We like unconsciously think that our version of reality is objective reality, and like everybody else must be like at least similar in the way that they experience what's going on in life, you know? And like as you sort of free yourself more and more and you get further and further from any of your own programming, and you start to really create your own identity, create your own reality, create your own life, then you start to see like how malleable it is and how trapped you really were. Like there's so much more freedom than you ever could have imagined. And that's why I'm kind of excited as I'm having these realizations, because it's like I feel like it's just begun. I feel like I'm getting it. I've only just started playing with this creativity around my own identity and my own reality and my own life, and it feels very limitless already. And I feel like I'm just a little baby, like in this way of being. It's very fun. It's very liberating. If you get anything out of these video journals, please share them with other people you know who may find some kind of value in them. Subscribe if you haven't already. Leave your comments down below. I'd love to hear anything that's emerging in your consciousness while you're listening to these words. I'll see you again shortly.